I believed the lie for 10 years. And I swear, if one random conversation hadn't happened at the grocery store where I worked, I might have gone my whole life believing it. When I was a kid, everyone in my family told me the same story. My older brother had run away. That was it. No goodbye, no letter, no phone call. Just gone. Back then, I was about 8 years old. It was 1987, and I remember the night almost like it happened yesterday. We were sitting around the dinner table. My dad had made peas with dinner, and I kept pushing them around with my fork because I wasn't really hungry. Something already felt off before anyone even said a word. Dad finally looked up from his plate. "Your brother left today." I blinked. "What do you mean? He ran away?" I remembered just staring at him. My brain couldn't even process what he was saying. "He ran away?" Dad nodded once. "He left while you were at school." I waited for him to smile, or laugh, or tell me it was some weird joke. Nothing. I swallowed hard. "When's he coming back?" Dad's face changed. His whole expression got heavy. "He probably isn't." I don't think I'd ever heard words hit that hard before. I loved my brother. We weren't one of those perfect TV families or anything, but we spent hours together. We'd sit in front of the television watching whatever happened to be on. We'd ride our bikes around the neighborhood until it got dark. Sometimes we'd just draw together for hours without saying much. So hearing that he'd left without even saying goodbye, yeah, that hurt. I barely touched my dinner after that. The next morning, things got even stranger. I looked out the back window and saw Dad chopping down my brother's favorite tree. I literally dropped what I was holding and ran outside. "Dad, stop." He kept swinging the axe. "Dad, what are you doing?" Without even looking at me, he said, "I'm sending it to your brother." I frowned. "The tree?" "Yeah, but how?" He finally looked over. I said, "I'm sending it." That answer made absolutely no sense. Even 8-year-old me knew it sounded weird. But when you're a kid, you assume adults know things you don't. So eventually I just nodded and accepted it, even though something in the back of my mind kept whispering, "That doesn't sound right." Life kept moving. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Months turned into years. At first, I expected my brother to walk through the front door every day, then every week, then maybe on Christmas, then maybe on my birthday. Eventually, I stopped expecting anything. I still missed him, though. Sometimes I'd catch myself looking at 2 bicycles in the garage before remembering there was only one person left to ride. Little stuff like that sneaks up on you. 10 years passed before I realized just how much of my childhood had been built around waiting for someone who never came home. By then, I was working part-time at a local grocery store. Nothing exciting ever happened there. You stocked shelves, bagged groceries, asked people if they found everything okay. The same thing every day. Then one afternoon, I looked up from the register and nearly froze. Walking through the automatic doors was my brother's best friend. I recognized him instantly. He looked older, obviously, but it was definitely him. My heart started pounding. For years, I'd wanted answers. Maybe this was finally my chance. I waited until he'd finished shopping before I walked over. "Hey," he turned. "Oh, hey." I don't know if you remember me. I do. There was a short, awkward silence. I rubbed the back of my neck. "So, this might sound weird." He smiled politely. "Go ahead. I was just wondering." I hesitated. "Did my brother ever live with you?" His smile disappeared. "What? Or, did he ever contact you after he left?" He stared at me like I'd suddenly started speaking another language. "What are you talking about?" "My brother." I laughed nervously. "You know, after he ran away." His eyebrows pulled together. "Ran away?" "Yeah." Another long pause. Then he slowly shook his head. "No, no, no. He never ran away." I felt my stomach tighten. "What do you mean?" "I mean exactly that." He looked genuinely confused. None of us ever knew where he went. I blinked. "But..." I couldn't even finish the sentence. He continued. "We haven't seen him in over 10 years. I felt cold all over. My dad told me he left." He frowned even harder. "That's not what we heard." I opened my mouth to ask another question. 100 questions, honestly. Where did everyone think he went? Why hadn't anyone told me? What was my dad talking about? But before I could say another word, I heard a familiar voice behind me. "There you are, Dad." I turned around. He was standing near the entrance, looking directly at me. For some reason, the second I saw him, every question that had been racing through my head just stopped. I glanced back at my brother's friend. "I'm sorry." He looked like he wanted to say something else. Instead, he just nodded. "It's okay." I walked over to help my dad. But the entire rest of my shift, I couldn't focus on anything. Not stocking shelves, not customers, not the register. Just one sentence kept replaying inside my head. He never ran away. I couldn't shake it. Not on the drive home. Not while I ate dinner. Not even lying in bed staring at the ceiling. He never ran away. Those 4 words just kept echoing in my head like somebody had hit repeat. Every time I tried convincing myself there had to be some misunderstanding, I'd remember the look on my brother's friend's face. He hadn't looked like someone hiding something. If anything, he'd looked completely confused that I'd even asked. So either he was lying, or my dad had been. I honestly didn't know which possibility scared me more. That night, after Dad finally went to bed, I quietly walked down the hallway toward my brother's old room. The room had barely changed over the years. Most of his furniture was gone, but the walls still looked familiar. I stood there for a minute just taking it all in. It felt frozen, like time had stopped the day he disappeared. I started opening drawers one by one. Nothing, closet, nothing. Old boxes, nothing. No letters. No photos I hadn't already seen. No clues. I checked under the bed even though I knew how ridiculous that was. Still nothing. After almost an hour, I let out a frustrated sigh. "Come on," I whispered to myself. "There has to be something." There wasn't. Eventually I gave up and went back to my room. I sat on the floor and pulled out an old drawing book we'd shared when we were kids. We used to spend entire afternoons filling it with superheroes, race cars, dinosaurs. Honestly, whatever 8-year-old boys thought was cool back then. I smiled without meaning to. For a second, I forgot why I'd even taken it out. I flipped through page after page. Crooked stick figures, crayon houses, terrible attempts at comic books. I actually laughed a little. No wonder Mom never framed these. Then something caught my eye. One page felt thicker. At first, I thought 2 sheets had stuck together after all those years. I carefully separated them. A tiny folded piece of paper slipped into my lap. I frowned. What? My hand suddenly felt cold. The paper had my name on it. Just one word. For me. I unfolded it as carefully as I could. The handwriting was unmistakable. My brother's. At first, I smiled. Then I started reading. The smile disappeared almost immediately. The note wasn't about drawings. It wasn't about games. It wasn't even really for a kid. It was about Dad. My brother described him hurting him, hitting him, punishing him by refusing to let him eat. I literally froze. "No," I whispered. I read the whole thing again because my brain refused to accept it. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe it was pretend. Maybe it was part of some story they'd been making up. I wanted any explanation except the obvious one. I turned another page. Another folded note. This one was hidden even better. My breathing got faster. I unfolded it. More details. More abuse. This time my brother wrote about being tied outside to a tree as punishment. I felt sick, actually sick. I covered my mouth with one hand and just stared at the paper. Growing up, there had been moments that didn't make sense. Bruises I'd never asked about. Days when my brother barely talked. Times he'd disappear into his room for hours. Back then, I was too young to understand any of it. Now those memories started crashing together. Like puzzle pieces I'd never realized belonged to the same picture. I stood up so quickly the drawing book fell onto the floor. "No way," I whispered. "No way." My room suddenly felt too small. Too quiet. I looked around at everything we'd shared growing up. Our old toys, shelves, boxes, anything. If he'd hidden notes here, maybe there were more. I started searching everything. Old board games, plastic bins, books, stuffed into toy boxes we'd forgotten about years ago. Every few minutes I'd find another tiny folded piece of paper. Every single one was addressed to me. Every single one described something worse than the last. I could barely breathe anymore. My hands were shaking so badly I almost tore one of them opening it. Then I found the last note. Even before unfolding it, I knew it was different. It was folded tighter, almost like he'd wanted to make absolutely sure nobody else would notice it. I slowly opened it. The words hit me harder than anything I'd read all night. He begged me to call the police. He wrote that he believed Dad was going to do something unspeakable to him soon. I just stared. My vision blurred. I don't even remember sitting down. But somehow I ended up on the floor with every note spread out around me. I kept thinking, he knew he was in danger. And I never knew any of this. I was just a kid, watching TV, riding bikes, wondering why my brother had stopped coming home. While all this was happening, I felt guilty. I know people tell you kids shouldn't blame themselves, and they're right. But sitting there that night, all I could think was, he tried to leave someone the truth. He tried, and nobody found it. Not for 10 years. I barely slept. The next morning, I gathered every note together and put them carefully into a folder before leaving for school. I couldn't concentrate on a single class. Teachers talked. Students laughed. People complained about homework. Everything sounded distant, like I was underwater. As soon as I had free time, I walked straight to the police station. I remember standing outside the front door for almost a full minute. Part of me wondered if they would even believe me. Another part wondered what would happen if they did. Finally, I walked inside. An officer looked up from the front desk. "Can I help you?" My voice cracked. I think my brother didn't run away." He looked at me for a second before gesturing toward a chair. "Tell me everything." So I did. I explained what my father had told me all those years ago. I told him about seeing my brother's friend at the grocery store. I described every strange thing that suddenly didn't make sense anymore. Then I carefully placed the folded notes on the desk, one by one. The room got quieter with every page they read. Nobody interrupted me. Nobody laughed. Nobody told me I was imagining things. When I finally finished talking, one of the officers looked at another across the room. Neither of them smiled. Neither of them said it was probably nothing. Instead, one quietly gathered the notes while the other asked for the names of my brother's old friends. For the first time in 10 years, someone was finally listening. The officers didn't waste any time. They took copies of every note my brother had hidden, asked me dozens of questions, and then started reaching out to people who had known him before he disappeared. I stayed at the station for what felt like hours, replaying the same memories over and over. One officer finally looked at me and said, "We'd like your brother's old friends to come in if they're willing." I nodded. "They know things," I said quietly. "I'm sure they do." Over the next day, they spoke with several of them. I wasn't in the interview rooms, obviously, but I could tell something had changed. Every officer I passed looked more serious than before. The notes alone had raised questions. But once multiple people started describing what they'd witnessed between my father and my brother over the years, those questions turned into something much bigger. Late that afternoon, one of the detectives walked over. "We're taking this very seriously." I swallowed. "So, what happens now?" "We're going to bring your father in." I just stared at him. Even after everything I'd read, even after everything I'd learned, hearing those words out loud didn't feel real. My father. The man who had tucked me into bed when I was little, the man who taught me how to ride a bike, the same man who had spent 10 years telling me my brother ran away. I wanted someone to tell me there had been a mistake. Instead, everything kept moving forward. The police asked if I wanted to come home with them while they waited for my father to return from work. I agreed. The ride back felt completely silent. I looked out the window almost the entire time, watching familiar streets pass by. Every house looked exactly the same as it always had. Mine didn't, not anymore. Several officers waited outside while we sat inside the living room. Nobody talked much. The ticking clock on the wall suddenly sounded louder than I'd ever noticed before. Then headlights appeared through the front window. My father's car pulled into the driveway. I literally stopped breathing. He walked up the front steps, unlocked the door, and stepped inside carrying the same tired expression he wore every evening. Then he saw the officers. "What is this?" One detective stepped forward. "We need you to come with us." My father frowned. "For what?" "We'll explain at the station." His eyes moved around the room until they landed on me. I couldn't even look away. For a second, nobody said anything. Then he looked back at the detectives. "This is ridiculous." They calmly informed him he was under arrest. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut echoed through the house. It was one of those sounds you never forget. He didn't yell. He didn't fight. He just kept insisting there had to be some misunderstanding as they led him outside. I stood in the doorway watching the police car drive away. My legs felt weak. Part of me wanted to cry. Another part just felt empty. The next several hours were a blur. Eventually, I was brought back to the station. Nobody rushed into the room with dramatic announcements like you see in movies. Instead, a detective quietly sat across from me. He took a slow breath before speaking. "We've been interviewing your father." I gripped the edge of my chair, and there was a long pause. He admitted what happened. Everything inside me seemed to stop. I didn't ask him to repeat it. I didn't need to. The detective continued speaking carefully, almost gently. The story I'd believed since I was 8 years old had never been true. My brother hadn't packed a bag. He hadn't left home. He hadn't abandoned me. My father had spent years abusing him. Then, during the week, everyone was told he'd supposedly run away. My father had beaten him and hidden him inside the tree that he later cut down. Suddenly, everything made sense. The tree, his strange explanation, sending it to my brother. I felt sick, actually sick. I leaned forward, covered my face with both hands, and just sat there trying to breathe. I couldn't stop thinking about that morning when I'd run outside begging him not to cut the tree down. I had been standing only a few feet away, completely unaware. The detective didn't interrupt me. He simply let the silence sit there. After several minutes, he quietly slid a box of tissues across the table. "I'm sorry." I nodded, but I couldn't speak. What do you even say after learning something like that? That your entire childhood had been built around a lie? That every birthday, every Christmas, every quiet moment wondering where your brother was had all been based on a story someone invented? I kept thinking about those tiny notes. He'd hidden them everywhere he thought I might someday look. He'd tried to tell me. He'd trusted that one day I'd find them. And somehow, he was right. Before I left the station, one detective handed the folder containing copies of the notes back to me. "You helped reopen this case," he said. I looked down at the folder. "No." My voice barely came out above a whisper. "My brother did. That same day, I packed everything I owned and left my father's house." There wasn't some dramatic confrontation. No final speech, no shouting. I just couldn't stay there another night. Every room suddenly felt different. Every memory had changed. I moved in with my mom, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could finally start grieving the brother I'd spent so long waiting to come home. Waiting for someone who'd never had the chance. Time has passed since then. Life kept moving, even when I wasn't sure I wanted it to. But there are some things you never really leave behind. This year, my father became eligible for parole. When I got the notice, I just sat there staring at it for a long time. People asked if I planned on attending the hearing. Absolutely. Not because I wanted to see him, because I wanted my brother's voice to be heard one more time. For 10 years, everyone believed my father. One conversation exposed the first crack in his story. A handful of tiny folded notes uncovered the rest. Those little pieces of paper couldn't save my brother back then, but they told the truth when nobody else could. And as long as I have a voice, I'll keep fighting to make sure that truth is never buried again.